on today's Story Beat.
When you're having a problem and you don't know what to do and you can't breathe and you think you're going to have to stop, look around because the answer is there, right there in front of you. The answer, usually when there's a problem, the answer is in the problem. I found that to be true. Look around.
This is StoryBeat with Steve Cuden, a podcast for the creative mind. StoryBeat explores how masters of creativity develop and produce brilliant works that people everywhere love and admire. So join us as we discover how talented creators find success in the worlds of imagination and entertainment. Here now is your host, Steve Cuden.
Thanks for joining us on StoryBeat. We're coming to you from the Steel City, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My guest today, Stuart Ross, wrote and directed the long-running musical Forever Plaid and its various offsprings, Plaid Tidings, The Sound of Plaid, and Forever Plaid the movie. Other New York credits include Radiant Baby, Enter Laughing the Musical, Standing on Ceremony, The Gondoliers, and Fun with Dick and Jane. Stuart co-wrote with Jack Viertel The Secret Life of the American Musical and then directed it. He also directed Golden Rainbow in its workshop. For the York, he adapted and directed Subways Are for Sleeping, It's a Bird, It's a Plane, It's Superman, Minnie's Boys, Silk Stockings, and Bajour. On Broadway, Stuart co-wrote the book to Starmites, which received 6 Tony nominations, and he also wrote the Radio City Music Hall Easter Show. For TV, he's directed sitcoms like Frasier and Veronica's Closet. He also created special material for PBS's Great Performances, An Evening at the Pops starring Jason Alexander and Diahann Carroll, Both Sides Now. For 10 seasons, Stuart has worked as a director, dramaturg, and/or writer at the Eugene O'Neill Theater Center National Music Theater Center Conference. And for 9 years, he's been a panelist for the ASCAP Disney Musical Theater Workshop. Current projects include Industrial Strength, the Alice B. Toklas Cookbook, the Bay Street Theater Youth Workshops Creating Theater Magic, and Second Time Around workshops. So for all those reasons and many more, it's a great honor and a true privilege for me to welcome to StoryBeat today the wonderfully multi-talented Stuart Ross. Stuart, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm really glad to be here.
Well, it's a great pleasure to have you. We've known each other for a while, and it's really terrific to finally get you on the show. So let's go back in time just a little bit. How old were you when the showbiz bug first bit you?
I was 6.
And what was it that turned you on?
I was supposed to go to see a movie. My brother, I had a brother who was much older, 14 years, and he was going to take me to New York for the first time. We were going to go see, I don't know, it was The Time Machine. And then we missed the show, so he said it was a Wednesday. So he said, let's take you to your first musical. And so we tried to get tickets to The Sound of Music. That was sold out or whatever reason. I don't really remember, but all I know is I got dragged to see Gypsy at the Imperial. It was on its last legs, and we're in that last row of the Imperial Theater. And I saw Gypsy with Ethel Merman.
With Ethel Merman, wow.
And and I didn't want to leave the theater. I started crying. I didn't want to leave. It was so magical. And then I just started running around, doing all the numbers, got, whatever, got the big LP.
It hooked you right in.
Right in.
Did you then start to watch other musicals and other shows?
Yeah, I think the next year they took me to see Viertel, and then Come Blow Your Horn, and funny thing happened the way to the Forum with Dick Shawn, always on the last legs and always in the balcony. I didn't understand half of what I was watching, but it kept hooking me. But I didn't like movie musicals at all.
What was it about the stage musicals you liked? Was it the big splashy numbers and lights?
You could feel it. You could feel it in your bones. And movie musicals, at least that back then, I think up until Fosse, up until Sweet Charity or Cabaret, the sound would change when they would sing. All of a sudden, literally the sound would get muffled or dubbed, and this huge, overly big orchestra would come in, and it didn't have that sass, that jazz, that feeling. Fosse changed that, especially with Sweet Charity. I mean, he really tried to capture why we love going to musicals. But no, I wasn't a fan of the big movie musicals. Maybe Bye Bye Birdie slipped by. I kind of like that because of the Anne Margaret, a lot of living to do number.
But the stage was it for you. That was your.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
did you start to work on shows? Did you start to act?
Yes, I did anything. In high school, I started out as an actor, of course, and worked as in my teens as an actor in summer stock, and did everything. And ran Spotlight. There was somebody I did theater workshops, and Loudon Wainwright was our teacher. Rufus's father, and also this guy named Abe Einhorn, directed us, taught us about comedy, and he was a playwright. He'd written a bunch of comedies, and George Abbott directed them in the 60s, and he was a major prop man. I think his first show was Fanny, and then his next show was he did Gypsy. And he told all these stories, and he made me laugh so hard. And then, when I did my first Broadway show, which was Good Time Charlie, he was the prop guy on it. And that was a couple of years, but through him, I learned how to do props. I used to take the train down and sit. I lived about 55, 60 miles north of the city, and I would get on the train, go see Saturday or Wednesday matinees. And I would sit backstage with him and prep. If it was a matinee, we'd prep the show for the evening show, then do the props. We did that for Wait Until Dark, Floor of the Red Menace. And I'd just sit back in a chair and just watch it from the wings.
Would you say that was your training, or did you then subsequently go and get formal training?
Yeah, well, my parents, I just had to do theater. So there was a huge fight. I couldn't go to a school with a theater department. They were just like not having it, and which was insane because I ended up paying for it. But we started a theater department where I went. And
you started a theater department at a school
with other theater people that really just love theater, and we started our own theater department, and then did plays and went crazy. And then I started working for props for Joe Papp while I was still in college. I would take, I wrote him a long letter about how I was devoted to theater, blah blah blah, kiss ass, and he hired me to do props at the Delacorte.
So did you want to be backstage most of your career?
Well, I loved being on stage till I didn't, but I couldn't get into the act. I started to take classes. I went to a school called Clark University in Worcester, Mass. And across the way, there were a Holy Cross, and they had a theater department. So I convinced them, and we got to take classes over there, but I couldn't get into the acting class. Was filled up, so I wasn't supposed to. I got into the directing class as a freshman, and that you were supposed to be a junior at least to go into directing, but I did it and did really well and loved it. So I just started concentrating on that, because watching an audience laugh and know that you were responsible for getting that moment right was a pretty great drug.
It is a pretty great drug, and it just, once it's in your veins, that's it. It's hard to get out.
Any kind of, when you watch an audience, just with the right moment hits. I just saw Days of Wine and Roses in New York, and there's a point where Brian Darcy James, after he's been sober, picks up a drink, and the audience gasps. You know about gasps.
Yes, I do.
That is just magical.
So when did you start to think about writing and directing? Then or later?
Directing, I started thinking about right away. I went to New York, I auditioned, but I always wanted to direct. Writing was later. I just started writing comedy for people and sketches, and that came later.
I find it interesting that when you started this, theater program at school, you were already being a maverick of sorts then. I don't think you knew you were being a maverick, but you were actually being a maverick.
And that sort of followed me. I never could understand it. I know when I got out to Hollywood and I wanted to, just work. I wanted a parking space. That's all. I just wanted to be told what to do. And they were going, no, you don't want to be in the loop. You need to create your own loop. That's what, and I didn't quite get that. It took me many years to understand.
I think it takes many people many years to understand that.
And I didn't realize I created my own loop or created whatever, being a maverick. And another thing happened pretty soon after I did that first show. I started to work for Bob Moss at the founding, or just after the moving of Playwrights Horizons to Theater Row and closing down the burlesque houses and getting in there. And I was like his assistant and administrator for the starting of Theater Row and raising the money.
How important do you think it's been in your total career that you started out learning all these different disciplines? Has that been vital to your career?
I don't know. It sort of makes you kind of a nudge, but I learned early on, if I want to know what's going on with one of my shows, or if I want to know what the problem is, I'll go talk to the set designer or the lighting guy. I will go to, I would just go right there and hang out with them and try to find out, what they thought and what's their take and what's the what are literally the nuts and bolts of the show.
Well, there are plenty of directors in the world that don't have that facility, that don't understand the technical capability of people, and you do. So I think that's an advantage for you, don't you think?
Yeah. I mean, Ken Billington saved our ass several times on Enter Laughing when we just couldn't figure out how to do something.
Do you think of yourself more as a writer, director, or combo, or how do you think of yourself?
Combo. I love writing, but I love fixing. I love, pinpointing where a show can go and where it needs help or where it needs to be adjusted, in the book and in freeing up writers. So I love that.
Do you get asked frequently to come in and look at things?
Yeah, a lot, a whole lot. And I can be as honest as I can. If I'm not directing, it's harder because
you're not in control.
You're not in control, but also the director has things in mind, and you're going, if you just had them move this way, we might be able to hear that line better. But you keep your mouth shut. I learned to keep my mouth shut and especially when somebody's directing my work. There's certain shows I wrote that I won't direct.
Why is that?
Radiant Baby, which I did book and lyrics on, co-lyrics, it's too much. Lyrics are very hard and book is very hard. And I know how hard the two are. And, I'm very aware of the pitfalls of just doing that. If you add directing into that, you can't do the other two very well. You
probably find it hard to get after yourself as a writer when you're the director.
I'm too hard on myself as a writer.
You're too hard on yourself.
I get frustrated. And then, that breeds frustration in the cast, I think. It makes me pout. The lyrics were just such a, I don't know anything about lyrics, except that I've heard songs that when I started writing lyrics. And so I'm really open to changing and finding and manipulating. And somebody says that lyric doesn't quite work. And I'm going, okay, let me go at it. It's just this big challenge. And then I've seen so many shows now that, like false rhymes, and it's almost like blank verse. It's being like AR-15s machine gunned at you of just these terrible rhymes. You just go, you're kidding, right?
Well, I guess it depends if it's a decent false rhyme, but most of the time it's not.
Well, Hamilton's riddled with them, but that's genius. It's different.
Exactly.
It's a different set curve. It's a different set of ears. It's a different genre.
I think Sondheim absolutely loathed false rhymes, and he was always trying to rhyme perfectly.
Yeah. And yes, and he did.
And he did. Better than anyone else ever has or probably ever will.
Yeah.
So you're, probably best known for Forever Plaid and the various plaids. Was the advantage there that you didn't have to write the songs? You were writing the material between the songs and the characters and so on.
I just had the idea. I wonder what this would be like sung, to hear this now, this 4-part harmony stuff now. And I got some people together and we transcribed it from the records, the 4 aces and the 4 lads. And we paid people to do it. This was before James Wright came on. And we just figured it out. And when we tried it the first time in '87 at the West Bank, with a very, very intense crowd, and I couldn't name the people in there, but it was a pretty hip crowd, and they were putting their arms around each other during, No Not Much or Perry Como or a Harry Belafonte ballad, I went, oh, there's something here. And then I had to go backwards. I had to go backwards and saying like, well, what's the story? And I've been taking a lot of librettist workshops at Music Theater Works, Charlie Willard, and all sorts of great people. Charlie Willard from Carnegie. And I learned a lot. And by the way, he was the one who really instructed us on the 3-act structure of a musical.
Perfect.
And Funny Girl was the quintessential 3-act structured musical, even though the intermission comes where the intermission.
Well, not to fool the listeners who don't know, when we're talking about 3-act structure, it's the 3 acts within the story, though most musicals have 2 acts with an intermission in between. But we're talking about story structure now, which is slightly different than what I like to think of as the musical theater structure, which is you break it in the middle somewhere, usually around the midpoint of the story. Was that the first musical you created?
Forever Plaid? No, I had done a show called The Heebie-Jeebies, again, on a whim, on my friend and partner. We wanted to write together. We'd written some sketches, so we created this show about the Boswell sisters. He played me the music. I said, this is great. And we started to just get a cast together and just do it. And we got some people and borrowed money, and we did it in the lobby of the West Side Theater upstairs, which was then the Chelsea. And they said, well, we did like 25, 30 minutes, and people went nuts. So we did it again. And the Berkshire Theater Festival happened to be there. And then we got booked to do it that summer at the Berkshire Theater Festival with an amazing cast and one of the living Boswell sisters. They were a singing group of the 20s. Who were the original girl group, actually.
How surprising was it for you that something that you had created was suddenly finding success? Was it a surprise?
Yes, I didn't realize it. I said, oh, gee, we love the music. And then I had to write a script. And then went, oh, we thought we could do it like Ain't Misbehavin'. We patterned it on Ain't Misbehavin', the whole structure. And I said, oh, and I was directing because that's all I ever wanted to do. And they said, no, you need a script. So we just started writing a script, and some of it was really good. And we got a production, and it opened. It was my first commercial. Again, it was a critical success, but it didn't last very long.
So you had the songs with no script, right? And so you then had to figure out how to make a story around the existing material, correct?
Yep.
And what's the trick to that? Is there a trick to that?
Well, I learned with Plaid, I made up the characters. There I had real characters, and one of them had polio, so there was all sorts of things. One of the Boswell sisters had polio, and the other two used to sort of like carry her around or walk with her arm in arm to fool everybody. They made movies, they did all this stuff, and it was weird with the living family around. They got very protective, and that was very difficult. But it did teach me, when I had the opportunity to do Plaid, which was another harmony group, that it was the characters. And like I said, I had all these romantic songs, and I'm going, well, what's the story? And I said, suppose the characters are the least romantic people in the history of the world. They don't want to perform. They never performed in public, and they look like they don't even know what a girl is. And they only have each other, and they each have this sadness in their lives. And they get killed on their way to the first gig and come back to Earth for one night. And other people have done similar things since I did Plaid, but they never get that underdog quality right. That lost, Jersey Boys did brilliantly. Very in awe of that show. But that was the key to Plaid's success, I thought.
Well, the difference between Plaid and Jersey Boys, and it's a big difference, is Jersey Boys is based on an existing story and a real story, and Plaid was made up by you.
But they made sure to keep the Jersey Boys they never thought they always had a problem. They always had something wrong. They never got cocky.
Conflict.
They had internal conflict, and they had sadness. So you can root for them. We all know that one.
Yeah, as opposed to it just looks like a bunch of people singing a bunch of songs. There's something to hang your hat on for the audience, so right. They can dig in. Do you object to the term jukebox musical? Some people do.
I don't like it. I don't like the term review either. Because Plaid is not either.
It's not a review for sure.
It's a concert with characters. and it follows chorus line, actually, almost like to the letter. But it's simple. And I don't consider it a jukebox musical personally, because that period where those songs were on the jukebox was very small. I mean, some of the songs were big hits, like Love Is a Many Splendor Thing and Catch a Falling Star, but really, it was not like ABBA or the Four Seasons or the Temptations or Donna Summer. They were like so little bit of a, that's the only reason. I don't think Ain't Misbehavin'. I don't consider it a jukebox musical, although I guess Jacques Brel is a jukebox musical.
Sure, Jacques Brel, Ain't Misbehavin', if you want to use that term, and I know that people do object to it.
But each one of those shows, and probably Plaid too, the really successful ones, broke the mold or did something different of the real successful one.
Well, Jacques Brel has no story in it. It's just a succession of songs.
But there's an emotional through line.
There is a through line, yes, but there's no actual story. It's all different characters all through every song.
Ain't Misbehavin' has those characters, and it was so skillfully put together. There's one line of dialogue, but each of those characters were kept away from each other until Black and Blue was the only when they come together. And you got to learn from that.
That's the great Richard Maltby Jr., who has also been a guest on this show.
No, I saw that.
And so when you're trying to create a show like that, are you trying to create a play at the same time that then the music fits into?
Yeah, you're trying to take the audience on a journey. You're trying to take the audience from kind of infatuation to true love. Like Casablanca does that, good old Robert McKee. There were several people I've wanted to do, I have on my list of things I would love to do, like Christine Lavin or Lily Allen. I mean, these are great songs and they tell stories, and they, there's so many more popular or more known. But yes, you have to be able to tell that story.
It's really critical, isn't it? The story part of the creation is really important.
Yeah, well, look at Mamma Mia. I mean, Jeepers, there you go. They're trying to find, identify their parent. I mean, pretty basic, pretty solid, pretty much of a human condition.
What would you say are the biggest challenges then to creating a show like that? What are the major issues that you have to overcome?
The rights.
The rights. How long did it take you to obtain the rights to do Forever Plaid and all those songs?
Oh, that was a breeze. The show I produced. Okay, that's part of my story. But Forever Plaid, I had no money when I did Plaid. I wanted to keep writing books to musicals and didn't have anybody to work with. I had just written Fun with Dick and Jane, Playwrights Horizons, and was writing this in my spare time, the Plaid thing, just seeing what happened. And so we kept doing it, and I did it for like 6 months. I kept taking out credit cards because every time you took it out, you got $10,000 worth of credit, and then I would take out another one. Or I was able to turn the show into an industrial, and I would do it late nights at different times up at Paulson's and McGraw's and West Bank. So by the time we got a real producer and we're ready to do the show was already had a run and was a hit, and we were just doing it in a cabaret. And all of a sudden they said, this isn't a cabaret, this is a real show. And they said, you better get the rights to these songs. And so the producer and the genius, Mark Sendroff, made an offer saying, yeah, if you don't want to, you want yours to be part of this, here's the deal. And if they didn't want to do it, we'll take the song out. And they all said, okay. And
wow.
We got a great deal, which thanks to us, nobody will ever get again.
I was going to say, I don't think anybody could get that again, could they?
No, not what we did. And other people like Beehive and other shows were paying like $75 per show per song, or per week per song. But we did a really good deal percentage-wise.
So you had the songs and you worked a show around the songs. Did you have to modify any of the songs in order to make the show work? No. So you actually fit everything to the songs.
Yeah, sometimes I put some dialogue in between it. I did find I had to put two songs together. I had to merge two songs or mash up two songs because 2.5 minutes wasn't enough to tell a story. I mean, there were a lot of visual stories going on. where you watch the guys go from, I don't want to do this, I hate doing this, they're going to hate us, to, oh my God, this feels so good to sing. I can't believe we never got to do this. This is so good. We wasted our lives. Then I had to come up with, where do I go after that? So I gave one a nosebleed, chronic nosebleed. So we had to stop the show, and we had to go off and get cauterized. And somebody was forced on stage to tell a story, and he didn't want to be there. And he told a story about his life, which was my story. And so then I had to start the show again. And, and only now they had a little more confidence, and they started to bring the audience more into the show until they get to Heart and Soul, where they actually bring somebody on stage. And then they did the Ed Sullivan thing, which blew them away, and they realized, this is so good, but we're going to have to leave soon. And we started to feel bad for them because they'd have to leave.
So which of the three legs of a show, obviously you do it at least with Plaid and some other shows, you've done it where you have the material of the music and lyrics already in hand. But typically, someone will write a play or before you have a libretto, and then they'll start to create songs for that libretto. This is a different way to look at it. You're creating the show around the songs. Do you find that to be more challenging or less challenging than creating the play first?
I would have to say it's less challenging because you have the limitations, and you know what it's ass backwards, frankly. So you have to stop, realize what you're going in for. You have to rearrange your curve. You got to make it. It's much harder to create a story from scratch, obviously, and that's why we use based on movies or plays or novels. Novels are really hard. I tried that a couple of times. It's really hard.
Adaptation is not necessarily an easy thing to do.
No, movies are easier because the camera works much the way the emotion of a song would work, as you point out somewhat. I guess, I don't know if you said that, but you did draw a lot of parallels between movies and musicals.
You're kind, and you're talking about my book, Beating Broadway. That's what you're talking about.
Beating Broadway.
Indeed. So how did you decide before you knew you were going to have a show? I know you were doing what was essentially a concert in the very beginning, but how did you decide which songs to choose?
I think there are 20-somethings, 26 songs in Plaid. Some of them are snippets or part songs, maybe 28. And we had about 45 because we would do I kept trying. Well, I tried it out as a play first. I wrote a play, actually. We did the thing, we did the cabaret, and then somebody said, well, went up to Rochester and tried it out as a 2-act version, sort of a play, sort of not. They come back to their old basement, semi-finished basement, and where they used to sing. They go through their lives, and that worked really well. And then a lot of people came up and said, we'll bring it to New York if you make them alive. And no, I made them alive, and I wrote this Champion Season kind of play about it. But that didn't work. It really didn't work at all. But the music carried it somehow. And then they said, this will never work, and they threw the rights back at me. And I just happened to have Starmites had just opened and closed, and it was kind of a sad experience. And then I gave up the rights, said, we're not going to produce this, just forget it. And they gave me back the rights to Forever Plaid, and I was pretty low, and I went ahead and did it myself.
Well, that turned out to be a fortuitous thing, huh?
Yeah. It didn't feel like that at the time.
I'm sure it didn't, but it turned out to be.
It was well, I don't know, maybe they're right. But, it took me a couple of months to get to the point. I think somebody was ripping me off. The people who did the taffetas were doing the cardigans. And I went, no, this I can't stand. So we actually started to do it.
Well, the business, as you know all too well, is filled with negatives and things that are difficult to overcome and obstacles and people who are trying to say no all the time to you. The business is filled with that. What do you do to overcome that? How did you get past the fact that they had given you the rights back and you were at odds with that? What did you do?
What did I do? I was a Buddhist. I was just a new Buddhist. And I went and got guidance. And I felt really low. And I was told, well, maybe it's just the way the world is saying, don't do this anymore. Or if you believe in it, keep going and see what happens. And so I kept going, and we actually opened the same weekend as, as a cabaret, late night cabaret, on the same weekend as the Cardigans. They reviewed us together, and we got the favorable review. But I had to let go of a lot, and I had a lot of support and a lot of people who were just believed in the show, the people who were performing it and donating their time.
Well, you had to believe in it yourself, I assume.
Yeah, it made me feel good. I just couldn't stop. I couldn't stop myself. And then I had to do all these very intricate press things.
What do you mean?
Well, I started this thing. We were performing at Paulson's, or then McGraw's, and the China Club was not far away. And we used to flyer the China Club, say, before you go there, come see Forever Plaid, and we'd get 7 days up there, and they'd review it, and we'd ask people to write the names of their friends, and we'd send postcards to people's friends. We just saw Forever Plaid. It looked like a greetings from Miami kind of postcard, greetings from Forever Plaid. And we'd pay for it, and just if they would write the postcard and send it to their friends, and we started selling out. And everything we made above the expenses, which were very minimal, went to Broadway Cares.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah, we didn't take any money or keep any money.
When you were thinking about how to create a show, whether it was then or now, and probably now it makes more sense in context now, do you think about what the audience is going to do with it? Or do you think about the audience? Do you have them in mind or not?
I think about me as the audience. And that's the way I direct too. What will keep me interested? If I get an emotional response, like I saw, there's a wonderful movie, I don't know if you saw it, but you should see it, called Bathtubs Over Broadway.
I have not seen it, but I've heard about it.
Brilliant documentary, and I think you can get it, well, any streaming service. I guess you can pay $3, or maybe it's free. I don't know. It's a brilliant movie about industrials from the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and about somebody who happened to wander into this bizarre field. They would give out albums, as souvenirs of these industrials in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and 80s. And he would just start collecting them. And he worked for Letterman, and Letterman had a Dave's Record Corner on it. But he started getting involved with the lives of the people who wrote these, who had big dreams, and get to know them and their songs. They would spend all their lives. I don't know if you've written industrials.
I have not. I've seen a couple.
And they would they wanted to write My Fair Lady or West Side Story, and they were writing the General Motors 1956, introducing the Chevrolet, the Edsel, the Impala. And that was, nobody would see or hear of it again. So he wrote this, or this movie was made about him and his relationships.
The industrials are true one-offs.
Yeah. And like in 1956, the General Motors industrial cost $3.5 million.
Wow.
The same year. And that was 2 performances, or maybe 5. In the same year, that was My Fair Lady was $350,000. And so it was really an interesting subject. So I got the rights, or worked with the rights to do a small show of this, because it affected my heart. I felt emotionally connected to these people's dreams, having to change your dreams and realizing, that what you did in life was valuable.
And so you're now working on a show that's sort of loosely based on that?
Yep. And, but it's, again, during the pandemic and during anything, I can only, if somebody hires me to do a show, that's one thing. They can think of doing Back to the Future or whatever. And if they're going to use me, great, I'd love it. But if I'm thinking of myself, I can handle 4 or 5 people. I can write for 4 or 5 people. I know I can produce it. I know I can get it on stage. I know I can hear it in the living room.
What's your trick for creating characters? You've done plenty of that. Do you have a particular methodology or technique for creating characters?
Yeah, I usually go into my own insecurities, or dream about what it would be like not to have these fears, or, I think I have to take it from my life, or, read enough about other people to see what they went through in their lives and what their struggles were, and how internal were they and how did they overcome them. Yeah, I also like to be funny, and I also like to, out of the worst situations, like to find the humor and just build on it. And I love word salads. I just do. And, people who like words, it's much easier to write for a character who likes words,
Well, sure. Well, for sure.
and,
It's hard to write for a character who doesn't like words.
yeah, it becomes like you're writing in negative space. And
Exactly.
that's always a joy. That's why I directed Frasier.
That's lots of words.
Yeah, but the people who were writing them thought the same way as the characters. They all had discretionary income, and they knew what they were writing about. It's one of the successes of the show.
Oh, that's a brilliantly written sitcom, one of the most brilliant of all time.
Of all times, and it was written by brilliant people who could write many other things. Those actors.
Are you an outliner? Do you outline your plot before you start to write?
Oh yeah. I almost have to have it written in my head before I start, which is not good. It really delays you. I mean, I grew close to Carl Reiner for the last 12 years of his wonderful life. After I did Enter Laughing, the musical, which was it used to be called So Long 174th Street. It was one of the worst musicals ever, or closed. And he said, and I got to work with Joe Stein in rewriting it, making it work. We made it work. And I got to work with Joe Stein and Carl Reiner. So I became friends with Carl when he came to New York, saw the show. I came out here and we became friends, and did the show a few times and out here a couple of times. And so he told me, whenever I was having downer times, he said, I just started this thing. He said, I didn't know what to do or write about. So I just said, Harry opens the door. There's a very beautiful Japanese woman standing there, asking him if he's free. And then I just took it from there. And that was it. And I don't know if I could do that. And that's how he started. He wrote this wonderful book called All Kinds of Love.
And that was how he wrote from that book?
On that book and probably everything. He published a book of just titles.
A book of just titles?
Yep.
I did not know that.
Yes, and I wish I had it right behind me. I'd quote it. He also published a book that said, people ask me how I write a book, and every morning I get up and write and look at what I write, and then I go to sleep, and every morning and that's all it is. That sentence or two sentences for like 160 pages.
Wow.
It's insane. It's like Gertrude Stein.
You must have learned a few things from hanging out with him.
I did.
Like what? Give us an example of something that Carl Reiner gave to you.
He told me to lose weight. He told me, I don't know, I just made him laugh a lot.
What a thrill that must have been to make Carl Reiner laugh.
Well, I told him, he said, what do you want to do out here? What kind of job do you want out here? I said, I don't care. I just want a parking spot with my name on it. And he thought that was the funniest thing. And I don't know. I'm trying to remember. I was trying to think, what did, Carl Reiner and I, what did we do? I mean, he was very, he did a lot of sketches for me. He would sit there and do your show sketches and tell me about what happened in the writer's room. And he would perform them for you? He'd sing Vesta La Juba or like recite Shakespeare. And, and we'd go through stuff, and I would bring him CDs and stuff. And he came to see Forever Plaid, and he came to the opening of the movie. Came to see all my shows, and I got to know his family, and we're still close. And that was a rough. That and Fred Willard; those are my two really rough pandemic losses. Yeah,
when Fred Willard went, and I've had various people around them. Like I've had Phil Proctor on the show.
Oh, that's right. I saw it twice. Didn't you have Phil on twice?
I had Phil on twice. Yeah. Well, Phil's been a friend for a long time, so it's always great when that happens.
Rocky Rococo at your service.
Fireside Theater.
Oh God, brilliant! Everybody, I learned. I was just talking with his daughter Hope. I had written a benefit for tree people out here, and we had Fred was in it, and Joanne Worley. It was all about the voice industry. People who do voiceovers and their stories. And so they asked me to do another one this year, and I said, why don't we do a celebration of Fred and all those second bananas? Because I fell in love with second bananas. I didn't want to know about Lucy. I want to know about Ethel.
The second bananas make the show go.
Azure Pitts, yes, Edward Everett Horton. I mean, jeez. And like you go to these parties at Fred and Mary Willard, and you would see all the poker players from Raymond. All of them. It was just the most exciting, fun thing for me.
Let's talk for a moment about directing in specific. How long had you been at the directing game before you thought to yourself, you know what, I am pretty good at it? Was it early on, or did it take you a while?
No, I knew from the beginning. I knew from when I was 18.
You had just innate self-confidence in being a director?
Yeah, but I didn't have innate self-confidence when somebody would challenge me. And that would plug me into so many things. That's one of my tips. Get therapy. If you're going to be a director, a writer, learn how to deal with people and be tolerant. Because it's very hard, no matter how brilliant your vision is.
Do you approach directing a play differently than you approach directing a musical?
Oh, when it's a play, I'm just like relieved. It's so much easier. I mean, it has its issues. It's so much. You get to sit and you don't have to worry. You can let the pacing happen. And if it's too slow or if it's not right, you can adjust it based on how humans biorhythms, how the human biorhythm mechanism works for the audience and the actors. And you can bathe in it.
For the audience that doesn't understand what you mean, when you say pacing, are you talking about the speed of things, the rhythm
No,
of
I'm
things?
talking about the pacing of the emotional orchestration of the piece, or what's going on underneath emotionally for the characters in a play. In a musical, you have to gear up to a song and you have to make sure that works. And it's just harder. You just have to make adjustments, and I try to the computer in my brain is always making adjustments. In a musical, in a play, I did notice in the last few plays I've done, they were easier to set earlier.
What do you mean by easier to set?
I wouldn't have to jiggle it around and cut that and speed this up and tighten that. You could let it unfold. It could blossom on its own
Once you staged it.
Well, yeah, and that I used to stage everything completely by the numbers. Brilliant. I was so good at it. I learned how to do it. I learned from these books from Carnegie Mellon, the Dean Carroll or Carradine books, like how to do it. And I took it like it was like sustenance for me. And then after a while, I realized it was already in my blood, and I could just let the actors just read it, and then occasionally say, "Why don't you get up? Why don't you turn? Why don't you go over there? Why don't we put a little sittable or an ottoman downstage? Why don't you sit on that? Just go over there, no big deal. See how it feels." And you can't do that in a musical.
Musicals is more precise, isn't it?
I know, especially I was directing Brigadoon for Reprise, which was one of the best things I've ever done. And it was Marin Maisie and Jason Dannelly.
Wow.
I know, and Deb Gibson and Orson Bean and Sean McDermott. It just was brilliant. And I was lucky and loved it. Jason wanted to know, where do I go? What do you want me to do? How do I get there? Marin wanted to, so like, let me just feel this for a minute and see where to go. And they were in the same scene. So I was like, oh, I didn't know how to, and we had the producer there watching me going, well, Stuart, what are you going to do now? Like,
and on top of it, they were married.
On top of it, they were married. And he was probably a little more of not exactly what you'd think of for Tommy in Brigadoon, but we made it really work for him. And for Marin, we just I wanted to lower the keys. I wanted her to start singing in a more conversational tone. And, I wanted that power that she has. She was a samurai, she was a genius.
An absolute genius, no question.
Oh, I saw her do the last performance of The King and I. And that was, she was amazing. It changed the whole show for me.
I saw her and Brian Stokes Mitchell do Kiss Me Kate. That was really something.
I wished she was out the night I saw it.
It was something. They were very well matched. Both of their power was very well matched. And
I saw her do a one-nighter Seth Rudetsky did for, I don't know, maybe it was Broadway Cares with a full orchestra of 20th Century. Doug Sills, and she tore that thing apart. And I was sitting behind Hal Prince, and he turned and he said, "I didn't know this thing was that funny." She was side-splitting.
All right, so you get a play or a musical delivered to you, or it might be a sitcom script, and maybe you do know it a little bit, or maybe you don't know it at all. Where do you start? Aside from reading it, you have to read it, but what's your first approach to it? What are you looking for in a script to make it go?
I look for an emotional connection right away. no matter what my brain says, if there was like a moment where I see somebody willing to grow and willing to own up to their problems, or admitting the truth about a situation, where I can hook in, where I can get the audience to go like, that's like me, or that pulls me into the story. I look for being pulled into the story.
And do you then drive the show toward that?
Yeah, absolutely. And, it depends, because then other things will happen. If there's only one or two moments, I can work with the writers to say, like, this is really working, and this isn't, or it's not. We're taking a tangent here, and kill the babies, kill your darlings. Is that what it's called?
Kill your darlings, yeah.
Yeah, but they don't want to hear that, especially when you're up for a job.
No, they don't want to hear that if they're up for a job.
Or if they really want to keep a number and it's not working, we're going to say, okay, let's figure this out. How do you want to make this work?
And do you then take the script and start to break it down all the way into its beats, or how do you operate?
Oh, I take it down further. Yeah, I like take each scene as it comes. Yeah, I guess I will break down a scene. When we did Enter Laughing, right from the get-go, I didn't want to do it. Right from the get-go, I found a way in. Right from the get-go, and Joe loved the idea that we made it. And unless you've seen Enter Laughing, I don't want to go into the details, but there's a point where we get to about 20 minutes into the show or more, we get to his parents. It's about Carl Reiner. It's autobiography.
Sure it is. Yeah.
Music by brilliant Stan Daniels. And the music, it's going like this and this and this, and it's hilarious. It gets hilarious. It builds and builds, and it gets so hilarious. You just don't know what you're going to do. You're at 20 minutes in, you've already sort of shot your wad with funny shtick, Joe and myself together, Josh Grazzetti, Richard Kind, all the other people who played in the show, George S. Irving. And then we got to Michael Tucker and Jill Eikenberry had a scene. They're the parents, and their kids coming home late from, like, it's one in the morning. And I just said, take your time. I literally stopped the show, and I said, pretend we're doing Awake and Sing now. I don't want a false beat here. I mean, you're going to have something to sew. You've got dishes. You're going to pace. You got an old bathrobe on, and we went to town in the opposite way that you would normally do a musical. We slowed the show down. That was beat by beat, because they were that kind of actor. They are that kind of actor. And they really have to know what they're doing, and they're married, and they were playing parents, and exactly. They had a time of joke. So we had all that going on, but we did break that down, and it worked. The audience was like mesmerized.
So being a director, as you well know, is one of the most high pressure jobs in theater or in TV or in film. It's a high pressure job. What do you do to handle pressure?
I say, when the pressure starts coming, I have a line I use. That's too important a decision for me to give a quick answer for. No matter what it is. No matter what it is. You like the blue or the red for the hat? I usually try to count to 10. I have to. I don't like everything coming. I have a severe, ADHD. I'm dyslexic. I have things. I'm also a soupçon OCD. I'm sure I'm spectrum adjacent. When all those things come, and on top of that, tinnitus or tinnitus, whatever. So sounds, people going in my ears, they sample, and I've learned to nod.
You nod, and you push them away for a little bit so you can think.
Yeah, I have to take a break and think. And unless somebody lies to me, that's still the hardest thing to deal with. Unless, somebody does something that's going to hurt the show, like a press agent not telling you there are critics coming that night when you were expecting them in 2 nights. And nobody telling me. So we said, when an actor says, can we try this tonight and see how it flies? And I go, yeah. And then you found out that the Times was there.
Oh, boy.
So that's rough stuff. And that's hard to keep your temper in check, but I've been doing that.
Do you find that it's extremely challenging to keep your temper in those moments?
Yeah.
So what do you do? Do you breathe? How do you get through it?
I have to breathe. I have to breathe. I have to, once or twice, I think once every 5 or 6 years, I'll have a meltdown. I'll snap, or just cry.
What's your favorite thing about rehearsals?
Oh God, working with the actors. It's almost like it's an intrusion when the audience comes. Laughing with the actors. Oh my God, that's when, or coming up with a line and getting the actors to laugh. Especially when you had Joe Stein, the great.
That's one of the greatest.
And he would say, like, I like your line better. Wow, that's great. When you have a new writer, well, you changed that line without me. I said, we're just trying to say the words that feel the more, and you get like, oh God, and this, I'm working with a writer who's close to 90 now on a show, and you have to handle him like, you're like, it's not handling them, but I have to make suggestions, ask him questions to bring it out, to get him to see the problem and get him to understand that there's a problem here and find another way. And he loves that.
Do you find you use the same technique with actors to get them to figure out what they should be doing in acting?
You have to. It's the same. They're people.
It's all about asking questions then, yes?
It's pretty much, working with the students, it's a little different because they don't have the same set of tools, but I still treat them like, okay, how does this feel? How does this feel? What do you think we should do here? And they don't know. You're the director, they'll say. And I'll go, yeah, I am. But I want to see where we can come to some ground where you're comfortable, because an actor being comfortable is heaven.
So you've gone all the way through rehearsals. It's now opening night, and your job more or less is finished. Is that a good thing? Is it a sad thing for you? How do you approach opening night?
It's frustrating because you can't talk to the actors. You can't go backstage. You can't give notes. Even if you have a great idea. I mean, with Enter Laughing, they actually said to me, you can come every night as long as you write a new joke every night, as long as you come up with a bit of business every night. But they didn't want notes, or they did. But, you had to have something that was going to make them, feel better about their performance.
So it's difficult for you not to meddle once the show's open.
Yeah, I mean, I don't understand. Yeah, it opened, I left, and I know people who do that, very good directors, but it's a job and it's over. It's hard for, when you're doing regional theater, because they're not going to pay for another room. Leave the next day. I always have an extra day I used to have an extra day in my contract. So it doesn't feel like a dream.
What for you is the big difference, and what do you think about directing TV versus theater?
I love TV. It was so much easier. It was so great. I mean, I didn't do a lot of it because right around the time when I started to get some traction, I started writing at the Public Theater. I sort of was there for a few years, working on Radiant Baby and, working with George Wolfe and creating a show. And I missed it. What the hardest thing for me about directing TV, and actors loved getting questions. Like, I remember I did thing with Kirstie Alley and Veronica's Closet. And I said, well, where are you coming from? When we did the first scene, the first day, she looked and stopped and she went, oh, you're from the theater.
Well, he's used to traffic cops.
Yeah, but it's also, I knew so much less than everybody else every camera person, every prop person, all the lighting people. I knew so much less that I felt a little cowed. I felt like an imposter syndrome. It made me very nervous to be with these great people.
Which you don't feel doing theater.
No, not at all. Unless the producers are hanging around. Like with producers hanging around in the theater, or probably I learned it in TV. And when there's the suits are in the audience, looking at around, just keep rehearsing the same scene over and over. They'll leave. They will leave. They will get bored. And
but the actors don't mind at all, do they? Because they want to rehearse.
They don't mind at all. They also know what's going on. So
I love hearing stories like that. That's a technique that you use to dissuade people that you don't want around to be around. I think that's great.
Yeah, we had ways. I had a stage manager, a wonderful stage manager, and whenever the producer was around, he would sing a song or he would say, "We need to rehearse the battle scene." And I went, "Oh, okay," and that meant the battle axe was coming, or whatever, whatever it meant. That meant that somebody was going to be there tapping their finger. I was doing a show with Larry Grossman. And it was called Compose Yourself, which I put together, and it was a review of his stuff and with stories. Jason was in it, and the wonderful Liz Larson, Darius DeHaas, Lorna Luft, Howard McGillen, I mean, Nikki Renee, Nikki James. It was just spectacular. And but Larry was always like on my case and sitting there with his pen clicking. He was very nervous. And so I put him in the show. Why don't you come on stage? Why don't you sing that song that was so personal and tell the story about Tony Bennett singing your song and hearing it coming out of the PJ Clark's on a summer day in New York in the 60s.
He wrote Snoopy, didn't he?
He wrote Snoopy and Minnie's Boys and Doll's Life and Grind and Good Time Charlie, the Muppets, all the Muppets. And he wrote Gone Too Soon, the Michael Jackson song. Yeah, I did that one other time with a writer who was just on my case the whole time, and I put him in that person. I put him in a straitjacket and put him in the show, like as a crazy person who had these songs in him, and he was a straitjacket, and it worked. And he was so concerned with that he didn't really give me too many notes about anything else.
That's funny. Let's talk for just a moment while we can about you're working with the ASCAP Disney Workshop. What is your function there? What do you do?
Well, that was a while ago. Michael Kirker asked me to do with Stephen Schwartz, to hear the shows and then be on a panel and give my 2 cents and criticism or find out what the writers want to say. That's how I always look at everything. Ask the writers what they intended. What did you intend by this? Do you think, and ask if they think it accomplishes it. And so we just go through all these shows of varying qualities and have to be, go down the line and be on a panel with 5 or 6 people. And you just, I remember sometimes that it was so exciting to see them like go, see the light bulb go off and see them really make changes in their show. I mean, that was from all the years at the O'Neill, because that was the magic place. That's when the bug really bit for developing new musicals, where you just rehearse the show and do a reading and then have a panel or discuss it, and then the writers go away, and the next day you do it again, tighten it and hear it. They would do some more rewriting. We'd do it and do it and do it. At the end of the 2 weeks, you had a different show.
Because the writers eventually lose sight of the forest for the trees, that old cliche, but they do. They can't see it, and they need the outside help.
They need the outside help, and they need to understand what they've written. I mean, it depends on the level of the writer or what's going on. But, and also Paulette Haupt, who was the brilliant head of it for so long, the artistic director, but she was like a facilitator, with the panels and the different people who would dramaturg her. And if somebody was going into their personal agenda, she would try to get the writers to see, you don't have to listen to that person. You do have to listen to that there's a problem there that person is seeing, that maybe has some validity. And she would sort of buffer. And that was really important to the writers. And that was a joy. And the same thing at the ASCAP Disney, except I wanted to start my own. Where do they go after the ASCAP Disney Workshop or the O'Neill? I want a place for second, where after they've had their first or second reading or regional production or workshop, where do they go? That's where the energy drops.
Well, it's still a challenge after all that to then get a show mounted somewhere. It's a big challenge.
Yeah. So I wanted to create the next step, kind of, and I've been in talks with a lot of people and just trying to table reads. Let them play the music. Let them, if they want to sing it, if they want friends to sing it, great. But it's about the work. It's about fixing so they can get ahead of the game. And the results were really exciting. I did a couple of shows that way, and it certainly had. Yeah, and her laughing was like that. I just kept having them read it again and again. And they said, we have to stage this. I said, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. You
feel like the reading and the reading and the reading leads you naturally to what the staging will ultimately be.
Me, I do. And the staging on the Inner Laughing, when we did it as the concert or the mufti, so much of it stayed. So much of it stayed through the many years. I think the last production was in 2019, and we started in 2007. So that was 12 years, and so much of the staging stayed the same. And I also invented during that show, I think it was that show, this thing, a little triangle with wheels on it, and 3 like plastic, I don't know, like handcuff, that kind of plastic that loops, where you can put your music stand on this little thing with casters. So you could roll your music stand around. So it's nearby, but you don't have to hold your script, and you can just rehearse and walk and stage with your friend, which is your script on a music stand that rolled.
Oh, that's brilliant.
And it's served me very, very well. That was really, really fun to do. And it really helps the actors bridge that. It's not a performance, it's not a real reading, because we've had the script long enough, but it still gives you permission to experiment.
It sounds to me like you would also be a very good teacher. Have you done some teaching?
I want to do more. I just don't, no, I do the Bay Street theater workshops, and I did the show up at the Matt School of Music. I love it. And I love watching kids, students learn to write and fix their own material. And I had an assistant from Pace when I did the Golden Rainbow workshop. And I would always say, like, look, okay, we need to put the piano on stage right, because the audience left, because the audience's eye, if we put it on stage over there, the audience eye goes there and it's going to stop. Then they have to look back to see the actors, and it's a pain in the ass. So keep the piano over here on the audience's left, and that's the way the eye goes. And I'm able to shoot out these things like, here, if you want to learn something, learn that.
Well, I taught for a long time at the school here in Pittsburgh called Point Park University, and there was nothing more fulfilling than seeing the light go on in a student's eyes. That's what you're talking about.
Yeah, that happened at the Manhattan School of Music. We were developing this new show, which was taking all the elements with different songs from different shows, creating what makes the musicals that we love work. And, taking them through. The Want song was a mashup of Lovely, Wouldn't It Be Loverly, and Somewhere That's Green, which, and then, we go through the whole show, and watching them come alive and watching them understand Put On Your Sunday Clothes was a release for the audience was amazing. It was just amazing. They would get emotional about talking about how that worked. And it was one of the most satisfying things I'd ever done.
I bet. Well, I've been having the most wonderful conversation with Stuart Ross for a little more than an hour now, and we're going to slowly wind the show down. And so I'm just wondering, in all of your experiences, you've told us some really great stories already, but do you have a story that you can share with us that's either weird, quirky, strange, offbeat, or just plain funny?
I had this job when I was an actor. I answered an ad in backstage, and I had this job. I would go down and I would just be one of the people in the mug line at the jail, at whatever you call that, jail.
Right.
So I would just sit there and read a book, and then I would go in and have to go into a mug line with all these criminals or not criminals to see if I got ID'd or to see what's going on. That was my most interesting job, but also. And
nobody ever pointed the finger and said it's you, did they?
You don't know that, but I could say I did. I don't know. I was asked to do Diahann Carroll's club act, a one-person show, and it was her first time in 20 years or whatever. And she didn't know if we were going to get along or whatever. And then I just had her Google herself and said, well, what are you going to have me say? I said, I don't know. Let's Google yourself in front of the audience. And this was 2006. And there, Diahann Carroll is like Googling herself and saying, like, the Diahann Carroll dresses from Dynasty and a Julia lunchbox. I said, oh my God. And then she was like going, so we put all that stuff into the show, and it sort of was so much fun. And we just so she got into the theater when her mother took her to see Annie Get Your Gun, and Ethel Merman shot a rifle in the air and a duck would fall down. And it was the same theater, and I would see a Gypsy, and it was Ethel Merman. She would come down through. I made an entrance to the out carrying a little dog, and we're the same person. So that's how, we got along really well, and I just love so much working with her, and trying to connect and find out that stuff. I did have one funny thing. So we're doing Enter Laughing, right, with George Irving, and he's 86. And he's playing the acting teacher. and we're having a good time. And it was with Michael Tucker and Radio Madison, all sharing a dressing room. And our stage manager, Sarah, who's young and fit, right? And it was at the York, and they had like all the hats were on top of the dressing room lights, the soffits or wherever. And she had to, I was there giving notes, and she had to step on a chair and reach up above George Irving. She was very close to head while she was up there. And he said, "Of all the days I forgot to put in my teeth."
So last question for you today, Stuart. You've given us just a huge amount of advice and a lot of great things to think about already in this show, but I'm wondering if you have a single solid piece of advice, or maybe more than one, that you like to tell people who are starting out in the business, or maybe they're in a little bit and trying to get to that next level.
Well, the first thing is make sure you have, I don't want to say therapy, or they don't teach you that. They don't teach you how to talk to people in directing school. But you can learn everything you want except how to deal with people who challenge you. Get out of your own way. Get out of your own way as fast as possible if you want to be a director, or if you want to be anything. But really, it's very, very important, no matter what's going on inside. And it was really hard for me to learn that. And I wish somebody had told me that. Also, when you hitting rough times, which I had many, or times when you're not working, that's what I call rough time. But I was cleaning out my apartment and said, I'm just going to get rid of the theater. I'm not going to have anything. I'm going to get rid of all my records. And I found those 45s that had the Four Lads, Perry Como, and all those things. And I said, I wonder what this would sound like live. So when you're having a problem and you don't know what to do, and you can't breathe, and you think you're going to have to stop, look around, because the answer is there, right there in front of you. The answer, usually when there's a problem, the answer is in the problem. I found that to be true. Look around. That's so important.
I think that's spectacular advice. It's usually right in front of you if you just bother to take the time to look.
Yeah, I mean, I see now I'm looking for, if you're looking for it, but you can calm down and look for it. Don't get too excited or aggravated, but yeah. Look for it with alert eyes. Be nice and stay alert.
Stuart Ross, this has just been so much fun to talk to you today, and you've just given us so much great stuff to think about. And I can't thank you enough for giving us these wonderful stories and for spending this much time with me. I really appreciate it.
Oh no, great. It was a pleasure.
And so we've come to the end of today's Story Beat. If you like this episode, won't you please take a moment to give us a comment, rating, or review on whatever app or platform you're listening to. Your support helps us bring more great StoryBeat episodes to you. StoryBeat is available on all major podcast apps and platforms, including Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, TuneIn, and many others. Until next time, I'm Steve Cuden. And may all your stories be unforgettable.